Hey again, everyone. Fall in for another episode of Tactical Plastic Report, where I talk about Army Men, a game of tactical plastic. It's been a little while since I've been back to this particular series, but when last I left off with everyone, I had just finished giving all of you fine folks a tour of the general setting and going through all the nations of the Plastos Federation. And from this point, I would like to step back a little bit. I would like to talk about some of the things going on under the hood beneath the surface for this game. Because while I really enjoyed the world building, and I am very proud of it, I think there's a lot of interesting things to be done with the setting that I made with the help and editing of other folks. I am particularly proud of lots of the mechanics of this game, because when I set out to make this, originally the idea was take the D&D 5e chassis and make it something that folks who enjoy tactical wargaming would really like. And while I have a lot of tactical rules that I hope to get to in another episode of this show, there is something else I'd like to talk about because I wanted to handle some of the issues that game masters always run into and that players always run into, even if we don't know that they're issues, and I restructured them in a new and interesting way that if you haven't cracked the cover, if you haven't read through all of the sections, particularly the game master section, you may not even know about. So, first and foremost, while some folks have obviously seen this as a bit of a flaw, I want to explain my logic and why I thought it was so important to include in this game, and that's dealing with player motivation. If you're a game master, you have run into the situation where a player has handed you a character, and no matter what plot hook you try to give them, they have either shrugged or folded their arms and say, "No, that's not something my character would be interested in." And Army Men has a built-in way of dealing with that of, you don't have a choice to pursue the plot hook you are given. You are all on a mission. And that saves so much time, energy, and effort for players and game masters alike, because if you are a player and you have made a character that you think is really interesting for this game, they might not be personally driven to pursue the goals that they're sent on. They might, in fact, be morally opposed to some of the things they're asked to do. And that's not something I recommend introducing just out of the blue. You should talk to your players if you want to have that as a plot or as a point for your game. But why you're here is very simple. You are part of a squad. The squad has been assigned to this task. Doesn't matter if you want to be here, doesn't matter if you like it, doesn't matter if you'd rather be doing anything else. This is your job. Go do it. And that can save so much energy that we often don't realize we're actually spending, because so many times there's this back and forth between players and game masters trying to figure out what the happy medium is going to be, what the buy-in is going to be, what the rewards are going to be. And with this setup, you know what's happening as soon as you show up. There's a squad, you all work together, you might not all get along, but you all are co-workers, you watch each other's backs. And you're going to be sent on missions that you have to accomplish. That's the setup. Knowing that before you even show up saves so much time, energy, and effort all around. Now, for those who feel the setup is too rigid or that it's too restrictive, there is a supplement I would like to put together in the future. It's Army Men Soldiers of Fortune, which is going to be much more familiar to anyone who's got a traditional RPG, particularly traditional fantasy RPG setup, in that you're all a mercenary company. So the jobs you take are going to be up to you, and where you go and how you handle yourself is much more your decision. But again, that's one of those projects that I really need time, energy, effort, and audience participation to work on. So if that's something you want to see from me or something you're excited about, let me know in the comments so that I know that I should figure out some way to budget time for that. But I mentioned rewards. And that's a second thing that I'm going to try not to hurt my shoulder patting myself on the back for, because one of the major issues that we run into with RPGs, and again, traditional fantasy RPGs are the best example of this, is that one of the big motivations that you often have for players, and one of the necessities for going up in power level, is you need to get loot. Whatever game it is, whether it's Pathfinder, whether it's a dozen different editions of Dungeons & Dragons, you need to go through the monster hordes, you need to take the treasures, you need to take that money, and you need to spend it to buy new equipment. And what you spend is how you, keep up with the challenge that's being thrown at you. However, Army Men, being what it is, doesn't give you loot. Most of the time, the enemies you're fighting don't even have loot. You are standing against a giant insectoid threat, after all. And if it's not them, you have, war profiteers, you have bandits and gang members, you have cabals and spies, you have weird robots no one can really understand. None of these things have loot. Loot is not a primary motivator for this game, and it's precisely because, well, you requisition things. And that is a big part of what I feel plays into the game. It's why when I write up a mission module, I have a recommended list of equipment. We'll get more into how this plays into things in the future. But it's one of those things of most of the items, the gear that you have when you go on a mission, doesn't belong to your character. You're given your weapon, your ammunition, your uniform, all the various equipment that you need, whether you're navigating the wild or whether you're hopping in a tank and riding right into a war zone. That's stuff that you're given by, your supply sergeant. It's given to you as part of your mission. That is a little unique, honestly. Of most games expect that you have personal equipment and that the money that you make from doing your dungeon delving or from whatever it is you're doing for the plot is then spent to get new stuff, and it creates this whole cycle where you as the game master have to figure out how much loot do I have to give them and how clear do I need to make the treasure caches so they can find them. Whereas Army Men offers you a unique opportunity as a game master and as a player of, do you want something really unique? Do you want a piece of equipment for this mission? How are you going to spend your mission budget, assuming you get one? And that's where we get into the last bit, where this is particularly useful if you're a game master, because this is a major part of how you create challenge. Now, challenge has been a bit of a contentious thing in Dungeons & Dragons over the years, and it only got worse with 5th edition as far as the arguments go. But CR, or your challenge rating, is generally speaking how difficult a particular monster or encounter should be for a party of your size and level. And it tries to take in all these different factors. It takes in monsters, armor class, their hit points, the location you're going to fight them in. All of those factors are supposed to be part of it. However, when you are a game master who's running Army Men, you have access to, well, your player's gear. You determine how much equipment they can bring to this fight, and that is a massive sliding bar as far as challenge goes. So let's say, for example, you have a standard mission. Your squad has been sent out to go deal with a Vespoid incursion. So there are these giant insectoid creatures that are overrunning a civilian area, and they need help. Alright, fair enough. You want to do a big knockdown, drag out, collection of fights, so you can feel real big, do like a Starship Troopers sort of thing. That's cool, that's fun. Everyone enjoys that from time to time. If you want to make this a really challenging mission, you limit the amount of equipment your players are allowed to bring. You give them a standard armament, a sidearm, body armor, and maybe, 2 or 3 reloads. That's it. So they are now facing down this huge incursion, this big threat with very limited ammunition and very limited class abilities. They're not going to get a chance to rest. They're not going to get a chance to get out and, recoup their losses. So every shot has to count. Every strategy needs to be done with, smart movement. They need to make sure that they have the advantage whenever they can. On the other hand, let's say you just want to give your players a fun romp. You want to give them something more like an 80s action movie, something ridiculous. You could institute, for example, the Game Master rule that I have in there for Hollywood guns, which is, we're not doing ammo tracking. Unless you roll a crit fail and, your weapon jams. Okay, spend an action, unjam it, keep shooting. We're not worrying about how many bullets you were given. We're not worried about, any of those side things. We're just focused on, the cool action and the flow of the fight. Alternatively, say that you want to keep some challenge. You want to make sure that there's at least a little bit of worry that they might run out of resources, but you don't give them all the resources to begin with. However, you might have them come across caches of ammunition. You might have them find new weapons as they go through the different fights. Maybe they come across resistance fighters who can help them, hold the line against these creatures. Or maybe they find a burnt-out truck on the side of the road that was attacked, but these insects have no use for the gear that was inside it, so they just left it strewn around. So there's a bunch of leftover ammunition. Maybe there's new weapons. Maybe they come across a spot where somebody set up a mounted machine gun that is now unattended that they can use to help hold back the horde. Or, if you just want to go nuts with it, open the armory in the beginning and tell them, whatever you want, take it. And you can just let them play with whatever ridiculous overpowered weapons that they want, and you can just scale the challenge of the stuff that they're fighting appropriately. It is, in my opinion, a very elegant system for making sure that your players feel challenged and that you can very easily take the same mission or the same parameters and you can slide it real fast from either, this is a walk in the park, this is no problem, to we need to be very careful, otherwise all of us are going to die and no one's going to find out what happened until someone comes to retrieve our bodies. And there's a little bit of tinkering, there's more than a couple of moving parts, and as with anything else, there's going to be some learning experiences from game masters. There's going to be some players getting used to the idea that you can't just always kick in the door, guns blazing, and hope for the best. But when it comes to creating challenge, when it comes to altering the stakes that make a game more or less difficult, Army Men has a lot to offer, and I think that specifically making so much of the challenge around what equipment your players have access to both feeds into the idea that this is, sort of a war game with extra depth. There's a lot of concern. I won't say worry. There's a lot of concern about what resources you can bring, what you can scrounge, what you can get hold of, and there's a lot of options for game masters to just strew things in your player's path, whether it's booby traps to make it more difficult, whether it's additional enemies to really beef up the challenge, or whether you just want to have certain, for lack of a better term, ammo dumps for players to get to a certain point, be like, very well, you have passed the last challenge, now here's the room full of enemy armaments, take what you need, move on to the next challenge. And while we often try not to use video game logic when it comes to making RPGs, it can sometimes feel a bit like Wolfenstein of once you get to a certain part of the level, now you get to recoup your losses, now you get new equipment, now you get fun new weapons, which should make you worry because what's behind those double doors that I need this armory to deal with? But those are some of my thoughts on the things that I changed from the Game Master side of things. I might, move on to what's different from the player side of things next, but I want to ask you all, what do you want to hear me talk about next for this game? Because I've moved through the very broad strokes of the setup and the setting. I've talked a little bit about mechanics. I've talked about some of the monsters and challenges you might have to deal with. What is something you're interested in? What do you want to hear more about for Army Men? What is something that either I haven't touched on yet, or that I've mentioned in passing that you're really curious about? Because I really like this game. I'm planning on expanding it as much as I can, but I need you all to come with me on that ride to make it happen. And if you all really want, I might just do an episode about what future supplements I would really like to put together and let you all vote to see what comes out next. But that's been this episode of Tactical Plastic Report. Fall out, and have a great day gaming, everyone.